have to get started.
Yeah, we do.
Good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock. Welcome.
Recording in progress.
Thank you. Welcome to Government Operations on July 6th. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I feel like we have lots of lovely faces this morning. Let's see. I do have a couple of changes to the agenda. I am going to be pulling the library bylaws, so we're not going to discuss that today. And let's see, Katrina let me know that Dominic is up in the box today, and he is going to talk to us about the monitor here, but we're going to put that at the very end when he does his regular report. And then what was the other thing? Also, let's see, on resolution 11769, the County Finance Department to County Administration Human Resources payroll position, there was just a very small change that Katrina showed me, which it's not substantial, it's just adding from and to, which I can tell you specifically when we get to that. Okay, any other changes to the agenda? All right, any comments from the public? All right, let's do the minutes from June 1st. Can I get somebody? Rich moves, seconded by Susan. Any questions, comments, changes? All right, all in favor? That's unanimous, thank you. All right, let's see. We have County Clerk resolution. Increase petty cash account, County Clerk, Department of Motor Vehicles. ID 11720. Can I have somebody move that? Rich, seconded by Dan. And is there any information on this? Anybody have thoughts or questions? I think it's just they want more money. Anything to say about this? Not at all. Okay, all in favor?
I was trying to think of something to say.
Something to say, I know. Well, we all want more money, but yeah. Okay, all right. Well, that was an easy one. All right. Moving on to administration resolutions.
Amanda?
Yeah.
I know you're bypassing the Tompkins County Public Library, but I briefly went through it, and I was looking for the provisions that deal with the appointment of a Tompkins County legislator. Is that in here, and where is it?
Yeah, you know, it is not. Actually, New York State public education law states that any body that is funding the public library cannot have a voting seat. I looked that up, and Susan can confirm. So the legislature, we can't have a voting member. But yeah, I would like to talk to some folks a little bit more about this before we work on this at the...
But that's coming. There'll be some clarification of what that position is and is allowed to do.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would also just add to think about, we are going to talk about the advisory board policy today. And there was a couple of things I noticed in the library bylaws that did not correlate with our policy that we're going to be hopefully passing. So there will be a couple of those types of things that will need to change as well. Okay, and yeah, we will talk more about that and bring it back at the next meeting. Thanks. Okay, now moving on to administration. Budget adjustment, Finance Department to County Administration, Human Resources payroll position. Can I get somebody move that? Rich, seconded by Susan. Okay, so this is the one It notes under the resolved, the Finance Department expenditure and County Administration expenditure. The clerk's just added in from. It's from the Finance Department to County Administration. So it's just adding from and to, so we know specifically where things are going. Does that make sense? Any other questions or comments on this? All right, you're saving all your comments for the policies, I think. Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous, thank you.
Item 5.
Oh, sorry, I skipped that, thanks. I'm turning into Dan.
Ouch, sting.
Well, at
Personal privilege.
At HHS, I'm always reminding him about stuff, so thank you, Mike. Okay, advisory board appointment to the Tompkins County Historical Commission, Leslyn McBean Claiborne, who some of you may know. Term expires December 31st, 2025. Can I get somebody to move that? Susan, Mike seconds. Questions, comments? All in favor?
I did have a comment.
Oh, yeah.
It's doctor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Doctor.
It should say that on here.
Well, she does indicate on her application she has her PhD.
I know, she's
If we're going to start
amazing.
using doctor, then I think the lawyers should be called doctors as well. They have doctors.
Let's have an argument.
We're esquires.
But I know it's a recent
Which
thing
means a
for-
gentleman, you know.
Yeah. I know Leslyn recently got her doctorate, so she should get to test drive it a bit.
Definitely, definitely. All right, all in favor? Great, that's unanimous, thank you. All right, moving that along, we did that. All right, now to one of the exciting topics of the morning. The resolution to update the Administrative Policy Manual, Policy 02-15, Personnel Records, and then additionally, Policy 0502, Fiscal Policy, ID 11770. Can somebody move that?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's a chance we're not going to pass the fiscal policy today. I'm wondering if we should wait or split them or something
Separate,
like that.
yeah.
Just because there's so many questions.
Does
and
that
comments.
work for folks?
I don't understand what you're
Both
asking.
policies are lumped into this resolution.
Yeah, there's
If we pass
two.
this now,
Oh,
there's
you
a
want-
chance we're not going to get all the way with the fiscal,
Then you need a motion to separate.
Yeah.
or hold off on this one until we do the discussion, or whatever you think.
Let's separate.
Yeah, let's just separate them. Does somebody want to move that?
Motion to separate.
Okay, seconded by Dan. All in favor? Okay, so we'll take the personnel records one, and then we'll do the fiscal policy. Good? So I guess we need to then move the personnel record policy. Rich, seconded by Susan. Okay, let's discuss personnel records, which is a short one. Questions, comments?
Maybe Ruby could speak to it.
Ruby, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Happy after 4th. Okay, this was a simple updating of a policy. It was even shorter than it is now with the revisions. It's simply updating for our current practices. At one time, you could only review the personnel records if you made an appointment and sat there with a member of the personnel staff. Now we're able to view them and provide copies rather than them sneaking their phones to copy their personnel records. It is their record, so we just updated the policy to ensure that they can view it. They can also get copies on whatever means that's more convenient, whether it's copying or whether we send an electronic document. It also makes a difference, makes a distinction between the file that is kept in the personnel office is the official personnel file. Any files or documents maintained by the department will only be incorporated in that personnel file if it's a part of the disciplinary action or their performance evaluations. So the file that we have on record is the official file. And I think that's about it, except we added a notation that documents will be expunged according to the collective bargaining agreement that's in effect.
Okay, great, thank you. Questions, Mike?
So obviously this covers when an employee can look at these and how. Who else has access to these files? And should that be covered here as to how that happens?
The access to these files, the employee has total access. If there's a matter of a subpoena or some sort of legal action, then it's foiled. That those people have access. But other than that, and a former employee can have access to their own records. Other than that, no. The performance evaluations are separate. They are part of the department head can request to review performance evaluations of employees that are thinking about coming to their department, but that's with the employee's authorization.
So even the department head who writes the evaluation can't review them later?
Right, they can do that because they send them. We can send them back. So they can view those that they've put in the records. But if, say for instance, an employee is transferring to a different department and the department head wants to see what their evaluations are, that's covered in our evaluation policy, but that has to be with the authority approval of the employee. So it's not open access to anyone.
Well, I wouldn't assume that it would be open access, but I just wondered who in our administration has the right to look at these. And what happens when we get a request for background or for an employee who is applying for a job in another community?
Written authorization.
Yeah, all right.
From the employee.
But what do we do if an employee has a bad record with us? For example, a law enforcement official that shouldn't be hired by another law enforcement agency, for example, because of conduct. How does that work?
When an employee or when a prospective applicant applies for such a position, there's a form that authorizes HR to provide whatever's in their personnel records. They can check medical, they can check disciplinary, they can check any of those. It's with their authorization that we can provide that to them. However, in a background check, there's some information, they will specify disciplinary actions. So we provide that.
What if they don't authorize?
Then they're not an applicant. Usually if the applicant refuses to authorize that, they're refusing the background. And that's a requirement of the position. So they have to authorize that in order to continue in the process.
All right, thank you for helping me understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I've got Rich and then Susan.
Mike makes a good point, I think. If there's a subpoena, do we have a policy on notification to the employee? And should we say something about that here?
No, I was trying to keep this as simple as possible. If there's a subpoena, then let's see what's in here. I think we have, I'll have to check because I think that's along with our foils and all of that information, but it's not specifically in the personnel records. So if we want to add something in there, we only deal with personnel, performance evaluations, the official personnel record. Disciplinary records are kept as long as the collective bargaining agreement says we keep them, but they're separate from the official personnel record. So we have some discretion as to when we will do that. Usually with a subpoena, we have to just open everything. So it's an open access for a subpoena or a FOIL if it's foilable information.
It's my view, I guess my view would be it might make sense to reference whatever our policy is on subpoenas. And don't repeat it here, but just say we follow it for requests. But I defer to.
Other thoughts on, just, does that make sense, Ruby? Just to add a,
I want to look at it again to make sure we're not including things in writing that we shouldn't include in this policy.
I mean, just,
So I could take it under consideration and review some things.
okay, Dan?
I mean, it doesn't really, doesn't it, I mean, doesn't a subpoena bypass everything else? Like, we can't say, oh, we don't,
Right.
it's like,
Right.
it's like us having a policy saying we follow the law, isn't it?
No, but the law says we have to deal with the subpoena. It doesn't say we have to notify the employee. And
Oh, I
that's
see.
what we'd want to clarify.
So you're asking a specific question.
But we
Will
could
it-
pass what we have here today, but then bring it back with that further change, if that makes sense.
You're asking a specific question, does the employee need to be notified if they're subpoenaed? Okay, I understand better now, thank you.
Okay, I would have to look into that. I'm not sure if we are required to notify the employee.
I don't think you are, but as a policy and our fair treatment of our employees, I would think any employee would want to know if their records were being subpoenaed.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it depend
Deborah?
on, wouldn't it depend on what kind of subpoena? Is this, if it's a grand jury subpoena? I don't know.
I don't know either, and I'm getting into something legal there that I don't feel qualified to answer at this.
There's a lot of lawyers sitting at the table right now. So they're, yeah. Well, why don't we let Ruby do a little more research on that? And in the meantime, I know,
Okay.
Susan had another question.
I don't actually have a question. I wanted to say thank you because as someone who had to deal with these policies often, there were a lot of open-ended, situations where there was no clear guidance. I guess I do have one question. There used to be I don't know if it was a rumor or policy, if after 5 years, I think this is not true, I didn't believe it at the time, if after 5 years the performance has improved enough, that disciplinary memo would be removed. I didn't do that. I mean, there was a personnel file in the organization where I was, plus the official file in your office. So that's the official file, and those memos
Correct.
stay, correct?
Only according to the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, so maybe
Road
that-
Patrol is the only agreement that has a specified time where after that time, certain documents are removed from the personnel files.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And just to say, this policy is coming before Budget Capital Personnel on Monday. So if you want to table or whatever, I can get some time to research that question for Rich.
What do folks want to do? Do you want to pass this and let Ruby have a little time and go forward after that?
I think we should pass it and let
Okay,
BCP have a crack at it as well.
yes, because several of us are also on BCP.
Okay?
Okay, so any other questions or comments? All in favor? That's unanimous. Okay, so thank you, Ruby, for explaining that to us and finding out a little more information as well. And we will discuss it again on Monday.
All right, thank you.
All right. All right, so can I have somebody please move the resolution to update the fiscal policy, policy 05-02? Rich, seconded by Susan. Okay, so this is a long policy. I know several folks have questions. Deborah and Dan and Norma had some emails in the last couple days. I have several questions. So I'm not sure. I guess I'll just open it up and ask folks what questions or edits they have. And Norma can kind of fill us in on things that maybe she's already gotten changed and go from there. So who wants to start? Dan, go for it.
Yeah, as Amanda said, I mean, some of these have, Norma's already responded to.
But not everyone.
Not everyone saw that.
Yeah,
I realized
so-
that too late in this discussion. Not everyone was on that list. Okay. Packet page 32. In the section that says contingent fund, it's about halfway down the page. The last phrase in that paragraph has been crossed out, and I think it should be back in there, or some version of it.
The sentence that says, and that are for other than mandated payments mandates.
Yes. It's a little awkward.
Yeah.
Here's what my suggestion was. And that are for other mandate expenses. Norma, I don't have your response right in front of me. I can't remember if you had different wording or thoughts about whether it should be in there or not.
Sorry. I didn't add different wording, but yeah, I think that if the committee wants to leave that in, then we can massage that a little bit, but keep the content, the intent the same.
Okay. Maybe what I'll do is as people bring something up, I'll just kind of look at folks and we can give a like yes, no discussion type of thing for each little note rather than, because I feel like there's going to be a lot.
It's going to be a lot.
So how do folks feel about adding that back in? Mike?
Finish your thought on that.
My thought's finished.
I was just thinking, how is, once in a while, we park money in contingency because we haven't actually decided to spend it. Does this language cover that?
Well, this particular contingent fund, I went back and looked, it hasn't been used for a very long time, so, no, not in that.
Because it's, so we don't park it in this contingent
No,
fund?
no,
Okay.
this is strictly for what, I'm sorry, no, I'm looking at mandates.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
you're right. It does not really speak to that. It isn't something that happens a lot, but I suppose we could, I'm not sure how that would be phrased, but no, it doesn't really speak to putting the temporary funds in there until we've decided where to allocate those permanently.
Seems like every year we have one or two
been a
items that
parking
we
lot.
do that with.
Yeah.
It is a parking lot.
Yeah, it is a parking lot.
So
We need to accommodate that.
Yeah, we did put $20,000 in as an example for
right.
design services on the jail, just without any idea what those might cost, but we wanted something there.
So do you feel like this last sentence, Mike, precludes that?
No.
Okay, do you want to add in something additional that says what you're talking about?
What was your language, Dan?
My language was, and that are for other mandated expenses.
Oh, other
Other
than,
than mandated.
because mandated expenses
than.
are already covered in A.
That are for other non-mandated, yeah, sorry, for other,
Other than mandated.
or for other non-mandated expenses.
Potential expenses?
Well, if we
And that's really
remove
what
the
that is.
only,
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Norma. What do you think?
No, I mean, the contingent fund is for,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's for, is to put things in that you don't know exactly what you're going to need it for.
Except for the parking idea,
Yes.
which we do know what we
Right.
need it for.
Deborah?
well, I think the problem here is the word only. If you say it's only for expenses that are unanticipated or unbudgeted, then that excludes the parking lot situation and things that are other than mandated.
What if we took out only and said for expenses that are unanticipated, unbudgeted, and/or contingent?
Yeah?
Yeah, that works.
Yes, I think so. I mean, my only hesitation is we're trying to differentiate this fund from the one right above it, the mandated fund, which is why the non-mandated was in there, but maybe it doesn't matter.
So it would say, okay, appropriated, cross out only, for expenses that are unanticipated, unbudgeted,
And
Unmandated.
a non-mandated.
and non-mandated, or unmandated. I think that works.
Yep.
I do too.
Okay, Norma's saying yes.
Unmandated does not sound right to me, though.
Not mandated. Makes
How about not mandated?
Not mandated.
Not mandated, it's probably, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I think we got that one.
I just came up with some language, and I just threw it here.
Okay,
I put
go.
at the end, from time to time, the legislature may designate funds in the contingent fund for program expenses that are not yet ripe for appropriation.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Does the committee is that friendly to folks to add in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you say it one more time?
Yep.
Sure.
Thank you.
From time to time, the legislature may designate funds in the contingent fund for program expenses that are not yet ripe for appropriation.
All right. Okay, let's go back to Dan's list.
Okay, thank you. Packet page 34. Section 2, Section 202, fiscal targets. Right at the top of packet page 34.
Yep.
Okay. So a sentence has been added about taking the tax cap into consideration, which I agree with the concept, but I think it's just in the wrong place. It's not a definition. It's like a new idea, in my opinion. I would just suggest adding it as new section D. That's just my thought. It just doesn't fit right there.
It looks like there was consensus on that.
Under that same area.
Yeah.
So it would be a new 2.02D.
Okay. What is A? A is not, there's no A. Okay.
No, never mind. Sorry.
Should it be definitions?
Should be an A before definition.
Right. You got that, Norma? Okay, so a fiscal target is A. Okay, and then that added couple sentences will be D. Okay, that's good? Okay.
Okay, in the same section, down in C, oh, sorry, I take it back. This is 203, section 203, long-range planning.
You had something in your email on 202C.
Yeah, I was incorrect. It's 203C. I was incorrect, yep. 203C, same page. Talks about multi-year planning, multi-year union bargaining agreements, multi-year contracts with vendors, and I was thinking about putting in something there about multi-year OTRs. Norma said this might not be the right section, so I don't know, Norma, I can't remember. I read your response yesterday, but I can't remember it right now.
Yeah, so I suggested that we change, if it's okay, I'll just read the last part of it.
Yeah.
Where it starts bargaining agreements, comma, multi-year contracts with vendors, comma, and multi-year over-target requests that may be considered fiscal target increase in the future.
That works for me.
Questions, Rich?
So that would exclude multi-years where we know they're going to go away. Okay. Yes, that makes
If we
sense.
really know they're going to go.
Yeah, do they?
It's rare.
We think.
They come, they stay.
Okay, so that may become fiscal target.
In the future, yeah. Similar to that list I shared with you folks.
Okay, great. Dan?
Okay, next one's packet page 37 and goes into 38, so it starts on the bottom of packet page 37. It is section 3, budget and capital program submission, review, and adoption. So let's see, the opening paragraphs of this section contains new language, extensive new language about a structurally balanced budget, ongoing expenses, and one-time expenses. And I'm just speaking for myself, I find this language too strict. I think that the concepts expressed in this section are important, but they're more like guidelines than mandates. So I'm just reading my own notes here. I would consider adding wording such as, this policy should not be interpreted to forbid exceptions to these guidelines in any given year, or possibly strict adherence to these guidelines is not essential year to year, but becomes more important in the long term. So if that's not obvious what I mean, what I'm saying is that on any given year, we can make some financial decisions that if we continue them forever would not be good, but it's okay to do it in a given year because of circumstances. So I just want to make sure that we have that flexibility.
Okay, Rich, then Mike?
I think we do a little bit of magic every year with our budget where we change our assumptions to arrive at a different outcome, but we're never saying that our budget isn't balanced. That's my feeling about it. And
Structurally balanced.
Mike?
Yeah, just wondering, maybe Lori could address this, how Moody's might look at a change like that, our fiscal policy.
Oh, who looks at it?
Moody's, our investment rating company.
I don't know for sure without checking with them, but my guess is that Moody's doesn't really get caught up in the budget. I think they're looking more at the actual fiscal results.
Norma?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that this is template language that comes from the what is it called? The government finance officers. So they provide you with some really good guidance on how to prepare fiscal policies or policies in general, and we reviewed several of those to see what might fit within our policy. So that's where that language came from.
Rich?
Norma, as written, do you see this language as preventing us from doing the things we do at the end of our budget process to right-size the impact on the taxpayer? Right-size as we see it.
Right,
I mean, we
yeah.
do our adjustment. Does this prevent us from doing that?
I don't think so, no. It's saying that we have to have a balanced budget, but it doesn't really say how you're balancing. The language does say that, at least, and Lori can chime in if she has other comments, but it does say that we're going to work toward having a sustainable budget, but I don't think it stops anybody from doing.
And for the record, we have had a sustainable budget. We have not had a fantastical budget. But when I say we make adjustments, like we determined estimates of our sales tax or the amount of risk we're going to carry in a certain area, for example, litigation reserves, and I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Okay, Dan?
So, Rich, I see what you're pointing out, and truthfully, that wasn't even the part of this I thought about. These are the two things that I thought about as examples. One is that, as Norma has pointed out, thank you, Norma, we have all these OTRs that are open-ended and that, we pretended they're short-term, but they're probably not. And that, someone could look at that and say, that's a structurally unsound budget. That argument could be made. And I don't think we should be limited from doing those things. We need to correct them over time, but in any given year, we could set something up that wouldn't be sustainable if it extended it way out into the future. So that was one example, the OTRs. The other one was COVID. We made some decisions that year that if those decisions stayed in place would have drastically changed the trajectory of our future legislative actions and government actions and budget. But we could do it in about 1 year, and then we continued to adjust and brought back the budget into a structurally sound, structurally balanced budget. So in any given, that's my whole point. In any given year, we might do something that's not sustainable, but we can make adjustments later on.
So do you have like language that you would want to add?
Yeah, I'd read two possibilities of what I'd written. One was, this policy should not be interpreted to forbid exceptions to these guidelines in any given year, or possibly, strict adherence to these guidelines is not essential year to year, but becomes more important in the long term.
How do people feel about Deb?
Yeah, I understand Dan's concern. I would just ask the committee, and I will make the same pitch to the BCP, that if we include language like that, for example, this policy should not be interpreted to forbid exceptions to these guidelines in any given year, I think there should be some additional language that makes it clear that we're only going to be moving forward with an exception if there is some relatively unusual exigency that demands us to do that.
Like COVID.
Because what I don't want to see is people saying, well, we can make this exception because I don't want to raise the tax levy.
You don't want to do that, but
Right.
if we don't allow legislators to make the case that we need to
If
bend
they
the
can make
policy.
the case that there's an exigency that requires it, I don't want to create a loophole that's so big you can drive a convoy of trucks through it.
Okay, let's see what the rest of the committee thinks. Rich?
Yeah, I understand Dan's point. I think to remain in compliance with the law and Moody's and everybody else, I don't think we ever want to say that we're not doing a balanced budget. COVID is a great example, but I remember the scary decisions we were making seemed to be pushing us towards trying to maintain a balanced budget, that we were cutting expenses like crazy.
All right, I just need to interrupt. This is not about a balanced budget. It's about a structurally balanced budget, which means something different to me, at least. Structurally means long-term to me.
And what we did with COVID was we're going to have this hopefully short-term drastic change in our spending pattern. We need to react to it. And we did, with some pain, but we did. And it was in service to that structural long-term balanced budget, I believe. I don't think we were having a party, going wild. So I'm okay with the language that seems to say there's controls on us here, because we seem to be able to accommodate them. We do, without going afoul of the law. And I'd be nervous about doing anything where we would be perhaps subject to criticism that we had moved away from our legal requirement.
Okay. Other thoughts on this suggested change? Susan or Mike? Yeah, I guess I'm not wanting to make that change either. So
Which change?
the change that Dan is suggesting to add in other language. So we kind of need to know if Mike and Susan want to make that change or not.
No, this makes sense to me.
Yeah, I understand where Dan's coming from, but I don't think we need to do that. And I worry about people getting the wrong impression if they read it.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Dan.
Okay, no problem.
All right, moving on.
The next pandemic comes along, you're going to be sorry. All right. Packet page 42. Section 302. Give me just a minute to find funding of asset maintenance. It's just something about that last sentence needs a little wordsmithing. To me, it doesn't make sense in the way it's written. So it currently says, it also helps build or acquire new assets that the county cannot afford to maintain. Norma, do you want to remind me what, you'd already corrected me, but I don't have it in front of me.
So what I think it really meant to say is, it also helps build or acquire new assets to replace assets that the county cannot afford to maintain.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yes.
Okay, so we got good with that change? To replace assets, okay?
Okay, keep going.
Yep.
Still on the same page, packet page 42. At the bottom, section 303B, criteria for recommendations. It contains 5 bullet points that continue on to the next page. However, right after that, in C on packet page 43, it refers to those bullet points by number. It says number 1, then numbers 2 through 5. So I either think we should number the bullet points or change the wording in section C to refer to the bullet points.
Yes.
I agree.
Easy one.
I'd put numbers on them.
Okay. Packet page 43, G says tentative budget, but there's nothing more there.
Yes.
So something should be put there. I think, Norma, you had some wording maybe, or maybe you're still working on it. I can't remember.
So I changed it to say, the expanded budget committee will approve a tentative budget to be considered by the legislature for approval.
Okay. Can you read it one more time?
Yep. The expanded budget committee will approve a tentative budget to be considered by the legislature for approval.
Great. Yeah,
I
Mike.
thought the tentative budget was the administrator's budget.
That's the recommended.
Yeah, but I think that becomes the tentative budget if we don't adopt a budget, right?
That's true.
So I think that's important
I feel like that is in here somewhere.
But there's a distinction between the budget that Lisa brings us, the budget that the expanded budget committee passes to be sent to the legislature, and then the budget that the legislature finally adopts. Those are not ever the same things. So,
But in the end, if we can't come to an agreement on at expanded budget or at the legislature on a budget,
then the recommended budget.
let's say a 7-7 vote, by the way, then under state law, it's my understanding, under the charter, the administrator's initial
Recommended budget.
budget becomes the
Tentative budget.
the tentative,
That's correct.
tentative budget, that is the tentative budget,
Yeah.
that becomes the budget. So I guess something ought to be said about that.
Is that somewhere else in here, Norma? I feel like
believe it.
I read it.
Recall it's there, yes, because that's,
Well, if it's somewhere else, that's okay.
It is,
I feel like it's in the rules, not in this section, but I could be wrong too.
So you're saying we should have a different term for this precise
Yeah, I think,
point in the process?
does
Well,
the charter
or-
say it's the tentative budget? Recommended budget.
Say legislature tentative budget?
yeah, there, under formal recommendations, it says, Rich is pointing it out,
what page?
42. Where was it? It's right here.
Oh, yeah.
If the full legislature does not approve changes to the tentative budget, then the county administrator's proposed budget remains the tentative budget, which we could reiterate or refer to section 3.03 of the fiscal policies. So either way, I suppose we could do that. We could either reiterate,
would be fine.
rewrite that same section in this place.
Do you want that added here?
I think referring to it would be fine.
Just referring to it,
I
yeah.
don't think you need to do it.
Okay.
I'm going to put in
Thanks for pointing that
parentheses.
out. That's
yep,
what I was
refer
worried about.
to section 3.03, okay?
Great. Okay, Dan.
2 more. Packet page 45. In section 404A, which is all the way at the bottom of packet page 45. It starts, it's response to shortfalls. So it refers to the targets designated above, which I think is referring to the fund balance target. And I have to confess some ignorance here because I haven't looked at the fund balance policy in a while. Is that what we have a fund balance target?
Can
Yeah, Deborah can talk about the fund
Yeah,
balance.
if you look at the fund balance policy, it's policy 0504, and there's a section in there that sets fund balance targets. So I think the best way to address your concern, to clarify, is to just refer to, in that 404A, refer to the fund balance targets set in policy 0504.
Can you remind us what a fund balance target is? Is it a range?
It's
Is it a
percentages.
A percentage?
There are, hang on, I've got that policy in this other book.
Yeah.
Yeah, Norma probably
The
can
count,
access it more
so
quickly
for
than I
example,
can.
the county and the general fund has to maintain at least an 18%, unless something changes at the presently, we have to have an 18% fund balance. Some of the other funds are, the D fund, the DM fund are required to keep a 10% fund balance, target fund balance. CTCL, that's the airport and the solid waste, they have to have 18 to 20% of their fund, target fund balance.
Okay. Okay, that's fine then. Thank you.
Do you want to see that? Those are the.
So I changed that to say in the fund balance targets policy set in 05-04.
That's good enough for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Last one. Back at page 46, 404C, right in the middle of the page, departmental deficits. There are some proposals to eliminate language in this section, and as I read it, what it does is it takes the legislature, the program committee, and the budget committee out of this particular process, and I just didn't want to do that without some discussion.
All right. Thoughts, Norma?
I was just going to, the reasoning for this is it just hasn't been the practice.
Right.
So that's the only reason it's out. There's no reason not to keep it there.
Yeah. I don't really remember seeing this, but other thoughts? Rich?
To Dan's point that it just needs to be discussed, do we want to know? I mean, is this something we should be paying attention to? We haven't been.
Right, we haven't been.
Sort of want to know, you know, so that we could respond if we wanted to.
Should the appropriate committee be advised?
That works. Deborah?
Well, I just wonder to what extent we've got departmental deficits that are substantial. I mean, if somebody's less than 10% over budget or has a deficit, I'm not sure that's something that's worth admin's time and the department's time and the legislature's time. So if we're going to be reviewing those, then I think that there ought to be some threshold
Makes sense.
where it rises to our attention. What do
Yeah.
you think?
I mean, that kind of works for me, but it's not, I just want to point, it doesn't seem like a lot of work or time for anyone because they're already submitting that report to the county administrator. This would just be
Sending it.
CCing it to us or something like that.
I do like the threshold limit, though, because I feel like, I mean, hopefully it's not a lot.
Like 25%, then
Yeah.
then
25%
clearly
is
we've got a problem.
huge. Don't you think?
I like 10%.
10% is pretty big, too.
Maybe I'll ask
I see Lee has his hand.
Norma and Bridget, does this happen often? Are departments writing to you and saying we have a deficit?
No, it happens. I mean, and I see Lee's hand is up. He's probably experienced it as a department head. Because they ran into a problem one year with not getting funding. But yeah, so it's not a common thing. And I will say that if somebody's running that big of a deficit, they're coming back to the legislature.
Right.
Lisa, or the county administrator's bringing it back anyway.
Lee?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just in my experience, there really were three things that drove it. You might have a mismatched grant year, something where there's a lag, or suddenly the state takes back some funds. That's caused a problem. The other is where you're off on revenues. And really the third thing that throws somebody into a deficit, just in my observation over the years, has to do with overtime costs. And to Rich's point, I think that's probably a place where you ought to be reporting that back to your oversight committee. But clearly, if there's problems, administration's on it. They know that there's going to be a deficit, and there's some kind of internal work going on to resolve that.
Dan?
I guess, the reason I want to know about it is because it affects everything else, right? Every piece of our budget affects everything else. So if we're motoring along thinking we're doing this and this and this because we have this money, and then it turns out, no, the department's, this department's $300,000 in arrears, like that affects all the other budgeting. So I don't know. I can't think of a good reason why we wouldn't want to know. I really can't.
Deb?
Yeah, I was curious to know from Lee's perspective, since he's the one of us who's actually experienced this, where you think a threshold ought to be. I mean, if 10% is reasonable, then that's cool with me, but you have experience, so what does your experience tell you is a significant deficit?
Well, everybody's target's different, but I think if you're up, $50,000 or more, you've got a problem.
So you would put a dollar amount on it and not a percentage?
I'm just trying to think, with smaller departments and smaller targets, a percentage may very well be the better approach. Because, some of your larger departments have means within them to address, $100,000 shortfall, but a smaller department with, $300,000 or $400,000 in target, $40,000 or $50,000 is going to be a big impact and hard to reconcile. That's a position.
What's the rough budget of Doer, for example?
Oh boy, it used to be right around $3 million for the target.
10% of $3 million is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. We should know about that.
What if we did 50,000 or 10%?
Whichever is smaller.
Whatever threshold you get by.
I'm okay to
Yeah.
just say 10%, but
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 to
if-
Dan's point, $3 million is a lot of money. That would
yeah,
really have budget impacts.
yeah,
300,000.
yeah. Norma?
I'm not sure I
Yeah,
want to
I'm
jump
sorry.
into this, but
Yeah.
in reality, if you want to be notified, I wouldn't change the policy at all. I would just leave it the way it is,
Yeah.
because they are few and far between. When they're small, we're fixing them usually, or we're managing it, and it isn't something that they're going to run a deficit at the very end because we're already dealing with it in the middle of the year. So by the time it gets to the end of the year, if they're still running a deficit, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't even put a percentage on it personally, but.
Okay, so, Mike?
I agree with Norma's point.
Yeah, so should we just add back in and the legislature?
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay, all right, we're adding that back in.
Thank you for taking all this time to listen to my thoughts.
Thank you. All right, who's next? I know Deborah has some, but, okay, Deborah.
I actually just have a couple of questions. We've eliminated this proposal would eliminate the fiscal levers. And You mentioned cost savers, Norma, in our exchange. I mean, I don't recall that we hear anything explicit about cost savers, but it seems to me that cost savers are valuable and we ought to keep them.
Yeah, and so the fiscal levers and cost savers, apparently, again, those were things that were used years ago, doesn't seem to be addressed anymore, but the cost savers, I think at least acknowledging them in the fiscal policy makes sense to keep it. Fiscal levers, I guess I would leave that up to you folks to determine whether that's important to keep.
Mike?
A lot of that meshed with rollover policy, too.
I'm sorry?
I think it meshed with the rollover policy, whether we let them keep their rollover because they had a cost saver, with a change in their target. Maybe I'm off base with that, but that's what I was thinking.
Well, so the cost savers are those folks that because of their existence, they save the county money, and that's kind of the idea behind it. And the idea between the fiscal levers and the cost savers is if you have an across-the-board cut, this was the purpose for it way back, okay. If you have an across-the-board cut and we have to go through and we're cutting everybody by 5%, those folks who are either cost savers or are among the fiscal levers are not cut the same way as everybody else, because if we cut them, we basically have cut ourselves.
That makes sense.
Right. So that's the purpose for having them there. But it just isn't, these are not terms that have been used in recent history.
Okay. And then I guess I was wondering, at some point, we had program-based budgeting.
Correct. We sort of still do. It's the way the financial system is set up, is to do program-based budgeting, but that too has kind of fallen on the wayside.
Because it's not acknowledged in here, and does it need to be?
No.
Okay. And then I guess there was one more thing, but again, I'm having elder brain.
You had some cleanup language, but
Yeah, but you
BCP,
took care
yeah,
of
I took
that.
care of all of
And
that.
I assume all of these.
Actually, before you go forward, to Deborah's point, where do we say that we follow program-based budgeting?
At one point in time.
Is there another policy?
No. No.
It's just a good idea.
No, it goes back to Lee mentioned it to me in a conversation. It goes back to BRAG, budget. What did you call that, Lee?
Mike is probably the only one that'll remember the Budget Reorganization Advisory Committee, BRAC, back in 94 and 95.
Eric
And that's-
Lerner.
What's that?
Eric Lerner.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's what I think pretty much established the department targets. We defined every department by the programs within them, and then the sum total of the programs created the budgeting unit, and the budgeting unit had the target. So I think when we started, there was something like 120 programs in the county. And over the years, because of funding streams and outside revenues and changes in reimbursements, a lot of those got collapsed and merged. And we really only worked with the budgeting unit target. So if a program went away, they didn't necessarily take away any of the target money because it was really geared toward the overall budgeting unit. And that's what we look at every year at the Expanded Budget Committee. You've got the programs still there, and we put the department heads through a god-awful program and impact assessment that I don't think anybody pays any attention to. I've asked previous administrators, and they said, well, nobody's ever asked us a question on it. But we go through that exercise, and I don't think the programs today are anywhere resemble maybe what they did almost 30 years ago. And so I'm not sure, I think you still want to be able to define your programs, but I don't know that it's, this exercise of breaking everything down is really a valuable use of time for departments, but you know.
I've got Mike, but I've got some questions, and we're already at 11 o'clock, so we kind of need to keep moving through this. Mike?
And I'll just say real quick that program-based budgeting was designed to help the legislature better understand how we're spending our money. We had line item budgets before that, and coming back to this cost saver issue, the first budget I served under was in 1994, I think it was, and the legislature had cut that across the board by X percentage, and we spent all year in the program committees trying to figure out how you pay for the fuel that was cut that you still had to have. And that's where this committee came up with this idea of, let's talk about the programs we're doing and how we ought to fund them, as opposed to a large item that may contain several programs, and we just didn't understand how you could cut part of it or add to part of it. So I'll just say that to try to say that's why we did it.
Okay. I'm gonna go through some of my questions, and then if there's other questions, we're gonna end the comment period. Okay, some of them were already addressed. Let me just.
There were some formatting changes that were made.
Yeah. I'll skip that one. Okay, so packet page 38. So towards the top, after all the information that was added, there's a sentence that says, each year the county administrator shall plan, schedule, and conduct training sessions for persons who wish to submit proposals. Who are the persons wishing to submit proposals?
Those would be the departments or the agencies that are submitting their proposals.
But don't they have to submit proposals? I mean,
Not if they don't want to get funded. Yes, they have to if they want to receive funding. But we have to provide training. I'm trying to find
right,
this
but
section.
I'm just talking about the who wish to submit proposals.
Oh,
I mean,
gotcha.
who are submitting proposals?
Who will be submitting.
Who will submit proposals? I mean, I think they.
Or just who submit proposals.
Okay. Thank you.
Lower down on that page, I think this came up in an email, but earlier on, at the very bottom, should be part of a comprehensive, it says 20-year long-range plan. Earlier in the document, it was changed to 10-year, so I think it should be changed to 10-year here as well.
Actually, I would recommend that we keep it at 20 and make both of them 20-year.
Make both of them 20.
Okay, well then.
Just because oftentimes your debt service goes out that far.
Okay.
All right, so you want to change it on page 31 in the definition of capital program.
It also appears on page
Would you
41.
disagree with that, Lori? It's a long time for looking at the total cost of
So if I'm
capital.
understanding correctly, if you put 20 here, does that mean you're doing a capital program for 20 years out? Approving one? I think
Fair enough. Okay.
So are we doing 10 or are we doing 20?
you might be entering.
I'm
for
not going to
20.
argue with you. If Lori
20,
says
but
10, let's go for 10.
Okay.
Because I'm paying attention to 20 plus. If Lori's saying 10, let's go with.
All right, we're going 10. And Dan, you
Not
said
gonna
it
fight
was
with the
on
finance
another
director.
page?
On page 41 also, it's at 10.
It's also on page 40.
41.
41.
And on page
All right, I trust that you got all of those. Okay. Something I just thought was interesting on page 43. At the bottom, it talks about budget transfers. And these are sometimes the things we get at the end of a agenda that we say, oh, that's not something we have to vote on. And it says about halfway through that final paragraph, the program committee is not required to take action to approve the transfer, but may reject the transfer or send it back. So I think that's kind of odd that we don't have to approve it, but we can say we don't like it. I never heard that or knew that, so just pointing that out.
That was news to me, too.
Yeah.
Isn't
And
that
then,
why we have them for information only? Very often.
In case the information is
yeah.
distasteful.
right, so it's not really for information only. It's for consideration. It's just, right, we just don't have to vote.
I think that's a good point to make at the full legislature, because that's a clarification everybody should understand.
Lee?
Yeah, just there was a distinction in always has been between transfers and adjustments, and transfers are budget neutral. I might move something from supplies to office expense in order to maintain the equilibrium and not have a line run short. It's and that's why it was for information only. So I mean, you could spot something that where you were moving heavy amount and maybe you were over budgeted as a department where you shouldn't have been. So that's why it's there for informational purposes. The adjustments is where they wanted the board to take action, because that would make a difference to the cash flow. Maybe you took in a $5,000 grant, so now you're going to adjust the budget to add it to your program expense or something. But transfers were really meant to be just a means for a department head to move things within their lines and stay within their target.
Okay, thanks. Okay, page 44. Section 4.02, budget adjustments. So I think it's kind of a significant change to change the 5,000 to 25,000. I was surprised nobody else brought that up. It seems like a bit much to me. I think the 5,000 provides us with a buffer, and then we do see other adjustments pretty regularly, which I kind of think we should see, but I don't know. How do people feel okay with that change? Susan?
I thought it was a big jump, and so I had a question about that.
Yeah.
I don't mind increasing it. I can see that over the years there was probably a need to increase that amount. It's just, it seemed a really big increase. So I don't know what the need is, and if it's happened that much has been needed, and that's where the number came from. I don't know where the number came from.
Yeah, good question. Does anybody have thoughts?
Not this finance director.
Not this finance.
Not this, no, I had worked with the previous finance director, and that was, the recommendation was to shift it to 25, yeah.
Okay, Rich?
Just based on what he was dealing with at the time, it just made more sense to.
I'm wondering how many times we do this in a year at 5,000?
Yeah, we do a lot.
A lot of them.
I see a lot. I mean, I feel like I see a lot.
What if we went to 10 and saw how that worked, and then we could edge it up if we're still seeing?
That works for me, but 25 feels like a lot.
I think the idea was to get it so that you weren't seeing as many of them.
Yeah.
Anybody,
I don't know if Lori wants to weigh in on this one.
thoughts?
I think 5,000 is probably more than you want to see, but that's your level of comfort of those adjustments. But, if you're happy to make it 10, 15,
What is?
it's just going to affect the amount you're going to see.
Right.
Right.
Right. I think we would definitely see fewer of them, but we would still see a significant amount at 10,000. Dan's nodding.
We could start with that and then look at it. I mean, you don't want to be nitpicky. I was going to say 15, but
Like 15.
15? Negotiating 15?
12.5?
15's fine.
Okay, 15's fine. Let's put it at 15.
Great.
Thank you very much. And that might be all of my comments. Okay, Rich, do you have,
I do.
okay.
Just going back to this program-based budgeting, this seems philosophical and sort of fundamental to how we're doing things. I feel a little uncomfortable just not saying anything, because then what are we doing? And it sounds like we've strayed away from program-based budgeting to something else.
I'd be happy to respond, yeah. So we haven't really gone away from program-based budgeting, not really. While we don't necessarily talk about it here in the legislature, the departments are preparing a program-based budget as a rule, particularly when you look at the programs that have several functional units, because they are grouped into programs, and within those programs, the departments are providing narrative to explain kind of what those individual programs are doing. So we haven't really strayed from that, and that was to Michael's point. That's exactly why I believe it was done, was to help legislators understand what all of those line items mean.
Okay, all to the good. Shouldn't we say it here or somewhere else? I mean, if that's what we're trying to do, that's a policy.
Wondered how this related to results-based accountability, because isn't that based on a program by program?
It is, yeah.
Other thoughts? Is there a reason we shouldn't add this in? Something about that?
We haven't taken it away, and it's been this, and not to say it's been this way right along. It hasn't gone away the way
Never said it. It has, we've been doing it,
it's
but
been,
it hasn't.
it's been happening, so I'm not sure
I'm
we have
sorry,
to
I've read it
fix
up.
something that isn't necessarily broke. It's just the way things are being transferred between departments, which is the only reason why it's been, some of the terminology has been changed. It isn't required that, there was a time when you could only transfer money within a program, not within a department. So that isn't true anymore. You know, so if it's if one department, if mental health or whole health, if whole health wants to move money from one functional unit to another functional unit, they can do that within the fiscal policy, the way the parameters are set. That's the only reason why any changes were made, because there was a time way back when this was established that program, you had to stay within the program. And the legislature, there was more flexibility. It's been happening that way, so where they've been able to do that.
I'm going to suggest we go ahead and move forward with this. We have another crack at this on Monday with 4 people who are sitting here. So if you want to think more about it or talk more with Norma, or we can discuss it again then.
Sure.
Okay. But we do kind of need to wrap this up, and if there are more changes.
Now, can I just ask that these changes that have been made, plus the technical amendments that were discussed in the emails, appear in the policy as it's presented to BCP?
Right. So probably that agenda has already, it's already been printed,
Yeah,
but if you could make
yeah.
more copies for Monday.
Wait, you're asking for an updated policy based on
Right,
today's
right, right.
discussion?
To reflect what's
Is that-
passed today.
That's not a lot of time between now and then.
I'll be doing it.
You can do it?
I did it as you guys were talking, so
Okay.
yeah.
Norma's on top of it.
I'm just
And
looking at the
then-
clerks to make sure they're on board.
Clerks
it
can
with
print
them.
them. Okay.
We'll go ahead and prepare 2 separate resolutions for the 2 different policies, make those corrections, and we'll get the updated to
Okay.
the policies from Bridget and Norma.
Excellent. You people are amazing. All right, let's go ahead and vote on this with all these changes that we have made. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone, for the exciting discussion. Thank you, Deborah, for being here to talk through it all. Okay, Another good one. We've been waiting for this one with bated breath. So let's go ahead and move the resolution to update the Administrative Policy Manual, Policy 08-26, advisory committees and advisory boards appointed by the county legislature. ID 11772. Dan moves. Rich seconds. So I think I've probably mentioned this lots of times that Michelle actually was working on this before she left us and retired, and passed that on to Katrina and Kathy, and we've had a small committee who's met several times, legislators, to talk through this. So these changes, ideally, I'll let Katrina or Taylor speak to them, but will make the policy more cohesive and clear, and that the advisory boards will then have better guidelines to kind of all be doing the same thing, which will allow the clerks to be much more, organized in what they're doing and maintaining all these records. So I don't know, Katrina, if you want to.
You pretty much summed it up. I did ask in the resolution that once this is passed, that we have a 12-month period to allow advisory boards an opportunity to become in compliance with this. And we are working on a template for bylaws. Once this is passed, we'll roll that out and help everybody get bylaws that adhere to this.
Great. Dan.
Also, just like as part of an introduction, I mean, if somebody was listening that we spent literally years on this policy, they'd be like, that's ridiculous. But it's not ridiculous for a couple of reasons. One is the clerks, I wish I had it in front of me, had outlined for us how many hours they spend on this stuff. And it's a lot. And the reason it's a lot is because I think this is still true, we have not found a software program that can handle this. Each advisory committee has these different parameters, and we cannot find a software program to automate this process. And that's a big motivation underneath all this, is that we're going to be able to get software that's going to handle it and free up a surprising number of hours of the clerks.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully once the various boards get on board with this, then, they'll have a better understanding of what they need to do. It'll fit with your program and save everybody time. Questions or comments or edits on the policy? Mike?
Still troubled on page 55 by the wording of the membership and voting 1 about term limits. I like the first sentence. All advisory boards and committees may have term limits. I think that's fine if they want to do that. But then it says term limits may not be waived without approval by the legislature. So if the advisory committee doesn't want term limits, then they have to still put that in there, and we have to agree to that. I have trouble with that. Either we're going to let them do their bylaws, or we're not going to let them do their bylaws. Membership may not be automatically extended upon term expiration. That's fine. I think a person needs to be reappointed. A member who has reached its term limit and wishes to continue serving on the board may reapply for membership after 1 year. And that's all right if you say where there are term limits, where the advisory board has asked for term limits.
Okay. I hear all that. I understood the term limits may not be waived without approval by the legislature. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I thought that to mean that if a board has term limits for their folks, that an individual couldn't be waived without coming back to us.
That's how I read it too.
Yeah, so
Well,
not.
you're saying you're reading that as the individual. See, I'm reading it as the whole process of term limits.
Yeah, no, but I get the confusion.
Then could we put something in there that talks about a term limited individual or something like that?
Yeah.
How about something like this? for the second sentence, if the advisory board has term limits, they may not be waived. I think that's what they're saying.
But
May
it's,
not be waived for,
it's that they
for an
can't,
individual or
they
something.
can't waive their own term limits without coming back to us. So it's not that we need to approve if
But
they
if we
have.
have to, but if we have to reappoint anyway,
Right. We have to reappoint
then we
anyway.
wouldn't, then if we reappointed, then you basically,
I think this came from the fact that boards were doing this. They were saying somebody's term expired, and then they just said, oh, you can stay on for another year or 2 years. And they didn't ever let the clerks know that they were extending somebody.
that's not good.
Yeah. So I think it's related to that, but I guess I'm not exactly sure how you make the language. I don't know if Katrina has a suggestion.
Dan, can you repeat?
Well, I was going to say, if, the second sentence would say, if for boards with term limits, those term limits may not be waived without approval.
I like that, because that's what was happening is there were term limits. They were being waived for one individual, not the other, and we had no clue. I mean, it was very hard to keep up with
Right.
what each individual advisory board was doing.
That would be acceptable to me.
Okay, so if boards have term limits, they may not be waived without approval by the legislature. Okay, and then your second question, Mike, was about the one full term off the board.
Well, no, I think now that you've told me about individuals, a member who's reached the term limit, if there is term limit, then I think that that's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. Okay,
See, I was thinking about it as term limits in general.
yeah. Makes sense, okay. Okay, other questions? Dan?
I feel like I've taken a lot of time, maybe. Go ahead,
Oh.
Okay, I have several. All right, packet page,
All right, well, if Dan has several, we're definitely going overtime today.
50, is that? I can't read it. 50, yes, packet page 50. About a third of the way down the page, there's a sentence that said, "It is important to periodically review whether an advisory board or committee is effective and is still needed annually." The word periodically was crossed out, the word annually was added, but I think I would put annually where the word periodically was, just to make the sentence clearer. So it would read, "It is important to annually review whether an advisory board or committee is effective."
Who is doing that reviewing?
That's a good question.
And that's,
Yeah, we should be.
and it was a lot of work for our small committee to do it once in 5 years. So is it realistic to review them annually?
Good question.
Mike?
Would be. I can only ever think of one advisory committee that was discontinued.
There have been quite a few.
That was the, have there been quite a few?
Well,
Well-
a handful.
We've
Yeah.
updated our list.
Yeah, at the beginning of the process when we were working on it, there was like 4 that just hadn't been in like, nobody was doing it for several years. So we just automatically, erased those. But, yeah, I don't know. I feel like annually might be a little bit too often. Rich?
I think if we set up specific criteria that could be measured, are they meeting? Have they made recommendations to committees? Are there members?
Right.
It wouldn't have to be a very high bar, but some regular review, I think, adds legitimacy to having the advisory committees.
I think Rich and Dan and I had worked on this. Would you guys be willing to meet one more time to talk about specifically that? I'm not sure we can really wordsmith that right now.
I'm happy to meet, but I would note that I escaped this. I had started working on this, and this was going to be my comment,
That's right.
was I had started working on this before I left GO,
Right.
and I count it as a great benefit that I missed a year of this. And I commend everybody who did it, including our clerks. This is far more complicated, as Dan said, than it seems on its surface. But
You want to be on the flag committee too?
flag committee.
But yes, I mean, I volunteer to help.
Okay, all right, so I think that's a good point. Maybe we can meet one more time to talk about that. What would the criteria be? How often does it make sense to review? Do we want to leave it as annually, and then we might tweak it? Mike?
Thought, maybe not say all of them are reviewed annually. Maybe you do a portion of them, maybe half of them or a third of them, and do it on a 3-year basis or 2-year basis or something.
Yeah,
But each year you could decide which ones we're going to review.
right.
It did, and just, it did take a little work because we consulted, or I
Yeah.
don't know if we, I think the clerks did, department heads on each one of these. So it's not just like sitting down with a list, it's a little more
Yeah.
than that.
I would propose that we do not add annually right now, and that we leave in periodically. And then the small group will meet again to discuss the specifics. Does that work? Okay, so strike annually. All right, back to Dan.
Okay. Packet page 55. Here's going to be a controversial one. So right at the top, it's talking about subcommittees. And, well, I'll just say what I would like to do, and I can explain more why if necessary. I would like to add a sentence in that paragraph that says, subcommittees should not be used as a means to bypass the intent and procedures of committees and advisory boards as outlined in this policy.
Wait, you're on 55?
I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rich, what did you say?
Is that something that's happening?
In my experience, it has, yes.
Could you read that again?
Yeah.
Subcommittees.
It's happened.
Subcommittees should not be used as a means to bypass the intent and procedures of committees and advisory boards as outlined in this policy.
May not be used.
Okay.
May not be used.
Dan's no fun.
That's
All right.
debatable, Rich.
You got that, Katrina or Taylor? Okay,
People like that?
yeah.
Oh, I'm a little surprised. Okay, good. Good. I should just quit while I'm ahead. Packet page 56. It talks about partial terms, and this is what it's right at the top, the second paragraph. It says, partial term, any member appointed after the first 90 days of a term commencing shall be considered to have served a partial term. Partial terms do not count against a term limit should one exist. So I understand the concept, but first of all, aren't there, I meant to look this up, but I did not, aren't there some really long terms? Aren't there like some 7-year terms or 5-year terms on some of the boards? Board of Health, maybe?
I think Board of Health is what comes to my mind.
Yeah, or even a 3-year term. If you're appointed 3 months into a 3-year term and you serve 2 years and 9 months, that doesn't count as a term. I just don't want to see it manipulated, or I don't know. So one thought I had, if this concerns anybody else, is to add something that says we would limit 1 partial term per term limit calculation. In other words, you serve 2 years and 9 months, and then you serve another 6 years after that, because that's what your term limits allow. You're now at 9 years. I just don't want to see people tacking on terms based on that they got appointed 3 months into a term.
Susan?
Yes, I don't know how to fix this, but that's definitely a concern. Because I've seen that exact thing happen where someone, leaves after 3 months, and then you've got someone for 9 years. And sometimes it hasn't been an effective appointment.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know about, I think it would be really tricky to monitor what you're suggesting, so I don't know quite how you would fix it. But I support the idea.
Well, maybe the 90, it should be 90 days. It should be something longer.
Percentage of the term.
Or a percentage of the term.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I mean, I would even say like 50% of the term. Other thoughts? 50%? Okay, so striking 90 days. Any member appointed after
50% of the term limit? No, 50% of the term,
commencing.
the term.
Has expired.
I'm looking at Katrina.
Any member appointed after how about any member appointed less than half the term?
After less than half the term remains?
Yes. Yeah, okay, after half the term remains. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Page 57. Coterminous terms, right at the top. It says that the term is set by the legislature. It's year to year generally. It doesn't matter if, for instance, we're holding a seat for someone from the town of Dryden, just to say, but they're no longer a town of Dryden town board member. They're still on our committee. That's our rule currently. My question is, what if they move out of county? Is that something that we should make an exception for? If someone moves out of the county, even though they've been appointed, do we still keep them on our committee? Maybe it doesn't matter. I just thought I would bring it up.
Haven't we said that they have to be residents of the county?
Yes, but as I read this policy, and maybe I'm wrong, it's saying once they're appointed for the rest of the term, regardless of what their status is. And I wonder if that should be true for residency. Or maybe it doesn't read that way to other people.
I'm not sure I care.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
All
not
right.
sure I agree.
All right, I'm not sure I care either.
Yeah, I think if they move away, but they're close enough that they still want to participate and they have 6 months left, I think that's okay. They wouldn't be able to be reappointed.
All right, that's fine with me. Do we require volunteers to adhere to all county policies?
So, I mean, doesn't like the ethics policy.
The ethics policy is included when they're sent a letter stating that they were appointed. We send them a copy of the ethics policy.
So I don't see anything in here about that particular one. Also, do we make them do the sexual harassment training? Do we require that?
Yes.
Should both of those things be in there?
Yes.
And if there's any other policies that they're required to follow, we should mention them. And I don't know if there are. Should we say they have to adhere to the county? I don't even know what the right words are. Our words, our
Yeah, I think.
mission statement. I don't know.
Values and-
I think that's a great idea. There could just be something that says all members of any board, committee, commission, blah, 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 must comply with the ethics, the code of ethics, the county policies, and what?
they should be required. I think we should be explicit about
Yes,
taking
and
the
they-
sexual harassment training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That,
Is that included in the individual bylaws for the org?
Sometimes.
Sometimes that
But we
would
could
be-
make that uniform because that's
We
coming
can
next.
go ahead and add that to
yeah, to
the
the template.
template.
I think that might sit better
Yeah.
there.
I mean, and their bylaws should say that they are required to follow county policies. So if that's not already in your template, that should be.
I'm making a note right now. to
Yeah.
Make sure that is.
Does that work, or do you? Okay.
Good idea.
Okay. I had one small thing on page 57, also under coterminous terms, just a little wording thing. Oh, no, yeah, number 5. Following careful consideration and recommendation of, I think it should say the relative standing committee of the legislature. It's a little unclear, it just
Amanda,
says.
which page did you say?
Oh, sorry, page 57,
Okay.
towards the top, number 5.
Being relevant?
Well, I did, but earlier on in the packet, they used the word relative. So I looked to try to be consistent, but I'd have to find where it said relative again. It could be relevant or relative. Mike?
I think relevant's all right, but I think it should say that they have to be removed for cause. This just says, if they don't like somebody on their advisory board, they can ask us to remove that person. And I don't think that's what we should be doing. But I mean, if the person is not attending meetings or is behaving criminally or something like that, then I think that would be a cause to remove.
I feel like we should add that a board member may be removed for cause, for. Friendly, got that? Okay. And so are we okay with the relevant standing committee? Okay.
Are there any cases where they report to special committees?
I don't know.
WDIC, does that Human Rights Commission report to them?
That's a special committee.
But WDIC reports back to budget. There's still a standing committee that would oversee even the special committees.
All right. I think we're good. Let's go ahead and vote on this. All in favor? That's unanimous. Yay! That's wonderful. Thank
With the
you.
proviso of another subcommittee meeting, right?
Thank you for everybody who's worked on this. Thank you to Michelle and Kathy.
This is what Kathy left me to work on advisory
Yeah.
board.
It's a lot. It was a lot. So this is great. We'll be communicating with the various boards and departments and give them some time to update their bylaws. Okay. We're saving the monitor discussion for the end. So we're at 11:38. How do folks feel about putting off the discussion of the rules until next month?
Okay.
Okay. I'll just say that the page I included here, I just did the 2 changes that we had talked about previously a couple months ago, and then I just added one thing that I've been thinking of. So you all have more time to do your homework, and if there's anything additional you want to bring up, we'll add that to our next meeting.
I'm going to send, I wrote I have a bunch of comments. I'll send them around to everyone so they have a chance to absorb them if you want.
All right.
I have questions, but not changes.
Okay.
Need some explanations, but I'm happy to wait.
Yeah, let's do that in August. Is that really already August? Okay. I do want to talk a little bit about the mid-year legislature travel and training status report. There looks like there's a copy on your desk. Is that the same?
It's the same. I realized this morning that the budget pack cut off the last column,
Yeah,
so.
okay. So you can fully see the
I
numbers.
was wondering.
And it's a little bigger, so it's a little easier to.
Great, thank you. So this is what we ask the clerks to give us a report halfway through the year so folks can see, and it's public, how much travel and training funding legislators are using. The idea that we came up with a couple years ago was that each legislator would be allotted $1,000 to use in a given year. And at the July midway point of the year, folks who hadn't used their money yet could either say, yes, I'd like to reserve my money, I'm going to go to a conference in the fall, or folks could say, no, I'm not, and release those funds out to the rest of the legislators to use. So we're in a little bit of a different position this year than in past years because we have a couple of legislators who have gone significantly over their allotment. Both Shauna and Greg and the clerks, we talked about their going to the NACO conference earlier in the year when they wanted to. We kind of agreed there should be extra funding based on everybody's, what people are using. I didn't quite know it was going to be that much over. So we're in a position now, we have $1,233 remaining in our travel fund. So I guess I just wanted to have a discussion about what folks think about, what if the handful of legislators who aren't on this list now say, okay, I want to use my $1,000. I haven't used my money yet. What do we do? Mike?
Just a couple of points. One, I think we were asked whether we were planning to use that, so I think that was a good idea. I'm not planning to use it mine, so I have no problem with it being used by others, although I think we have to be careful about public record, and it could be looked at by the media and said, well, she spent how much or he spent how much. And the other thing is, it seems like we had several people that went to the fall NACO, or not NACO, but NISAC conference last year.
Yeah.
And if you, in the past, years past, we had maybe one or maybe two. I mean, the chair is always, we expect to go if she wants to, but I just wonder, there certainly isn't enough money there to pay for 5 or 6 legislators to go to the fall conference if that's what they want.
I don't think there is. Yeah, there's not. So.
And let me just say, in years past, when there wasn't enough money for everybody, we just said, we divided it up and said, this is how much money we can allocate, and beyond that, you'd have to pay your own.
Right. Rich?
I was thinking about going to the NISAC conference, so this would be a consideration. I'd also note, though, that we had made some comments about the importance of new legislators getting training and trying to encourage that, and that seems to have worked here, so that's good. It's just surprising it bumped up as much as it did. I suppose we could add some additional funding if we could scrape it from another part of the barrel. We were talking about transfers and adjustments. That's what it's for.
Yeah, we did say that last year. So the only person who we sort of gave that allowance to this year was Susan. So, yeah.
I will just say it was enormously helpful to be able to go to NISAC so, so soon after being elected. So, thank you.
Well, no, that's what it's for. And particularly if you had further training you wanted to do,
Right.
that we should preference that.
Right,
Was what the
definitely.
discussion had been.
Mike?
We'd have to be careful about asking Katrina to transfer money, because I don't think she's got a lot of extra money, and she's got some potential expenses coming up with the possible fourth person coming on. So we got to be careful there, too. If you're going to add money, I think it's got to come out of contingent.
I think, doesn't HR have a training fund that could be tapped for this purpose? Yeah. Not to argue on my own behalf, but I'll argue on my own behalf that if you just take the remaining amount and divvy it up, that doesn't seem entirely fair, and that everybody else got 100% paid.
Yeah.
But, if that's what it is, life will go on.
Well, I mean, life will go on, but if somebody doesn't have the funding to, if I was expecting to have $1,000 and I'm saving it for something in November, and now suddenly it's not there, it's not fair, does it, I don't know. Dan?
Lee has his hand up, too.
Oh, Lee?
I've got to drop out and head to another appointment. Thank you for letting me sit in. I'm not going to use mine this year if that helps anybody. The only thing I might do is do an up and back for NISAC to the committee meeting, but you can release mine.
Great, thank you, Lee. Did you have, Mike?
Is there $6,000 more? Or has it already been used? I mean,
It's been used.
it's already been used,
There's
right?
$1,200, there's
Yeah, it's already been,
$1,200 left in that account.
right, the money
That's what
has been
that's
used.
the way I read it.
So if people want to go to the fall conference, we will have to get money out of contingent or wherever we decide. Dan?
Thanks. I was going to argue on behalf of Rich also. He's absolutely right. He didn't go earlier, and
Yeah.
he's supposed to have $1,000 sitting there waiting for him. So I would personally have no problem putting more money into the training fund. I noticed that, so we had calculated $1,000 a few years ago. I noticed that, I just did my one NISAC conference. I didn't do anything special. I got a room, I got the full registration. I didn't do anything weird, and it came out to over $1,000. So we probably need to up it a little bit.
The costs are slightly increasing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we need to adjust that sometime this year, probably. And my other thing I noticed as I started reading through this and thinking about it is that we don't allow any extra for the chair. And that seems a little weird to me. I think the chair should have an extra fund.
Right, if we're saying we want them to go to both NISAC conferences and they may want to do something else, yeah. So it seems like on that note, maybe the individual fund, the individual allotment per legislator should be $1,200 and going forward into next year's budget. And then we can also discuss if the chair should have an additional amount. So I guess my question is, well, two questions. I guess what I'm hearing maybe is that folks, if there are several people who want to go to NISAC in the fall, perhaps the people who haven't used any funds would get preference to have theirs up to $1,000, have theirs covered. And then anybody else who is on this list, they would get either the remainder of their amount or nothing if they've gone over, other than Susan, because she's the new person. And then, So my question is, are we suggesting that we take this money out of contingent fund? And I guess it will just be on sort of an as-needed basis, depending on who wants to use their funds?
Well, what we're supposed to do is, everyone's supposed to say by
Right.
next month whether they want to do any more. And I think we should do that.
Yeah.
And then we'll have a dollar total, and then we can make that decision about whether or not to pull more out of contingency. That would be my suggestion.
Right, but it's still possible that somebody may not know. They may be looking at conferences right now and say, I want to go to something, but I'm not sure, I have to work out the details, or...
But we do have our policy is that they have to
Right,
tell
so
us
they-
next month.
Right, but they could say, I want to use my money, but I'm not sure exactly how much. I think that's okay. You're reserving, that's what we've decided, you're reserving your money for yourself, but you don't have to specify exactly.
I can send out an email just reminding legislators to let me know if they do have plans for a conference in the fall.
Maybe, can
And
I
then
send that email?
You can send it.
Yeah, because
You are
then I
more than
can-
welcome to.
I can reference this and say
Yeah,
that,
can you send that to
yeah,
them too?
and that we've talked about it, and here's some thoughts.
Once we determine what plans are, we could determine
Yeah.
if we have funding that I can do transfers, et cetera, or if we have to go to contingent.
Right. And then I guess my next question is, if the people who have gone significantly over this year, should they sort of be restricted next year? So other people can, I mean, I was considering, well, they had such a great time at NACO, I'd maybe like to go. So what if I want to spend $3,000 next year, you know? Right, negative rollover. Mike?
I don't think we should penalize the chair ever. I think the
Right.
chair would be our representative to any of these if we wanted.
Right, okay, so exclusive of the chair. Rich?
I guess I'm just wondering, how did we end up here? Was there a request?
There was informal discussion. Greg and Shauna talked to me. I think
They talked to me, and they did
Yeah.
come to a GO meeting, I want to say January or February. Greg did and asked about going to NACO. This is the first time we had anybody attend NACO,
right.
so we weren't,
Since Beverly Livesey.
since Kathy and, well, I don't know, Kathy and I kind of discussed it, and I didn't have any record. I had no
Right.
idea really the costs that were involved, and
Right, I mean,
it's an
it's
expensive.
one thing to pay for the conference, but the lodging and the airfare, I mean, that's.
And those were
huge.
discounted, too.
Yeah, so,
All right, do we get a first-year discount this year for them?
I think Shauna got an early bird registration, which was about a $50 discount on registration, which wasn't huge and we paid for hers out of last year's budget because the registration had to be done in December.
so it's challenging. I think we want people to go to conferences and have these experiences, but we also want it to be fair, and that's why we set up the system that we did a couple of years ago. So I guess my thought would just be that if folks who haven't used their funding want to for the second half of the year, they should be entitled up to $1,000, which we'll have to take from contingent. And folks who haven't gone over here are still entitled to we told them they're entitled to that much money. So if they wanted to go to NISAC, they could use, whatever is left here. Other thoughts? Okay, I will send an email sort of outlining that we've talked about this and go from there. All right, thank you. Phew, that's a lot. All right, let's I don't have a report. We've talked about a lot. Let's go to our deputy county administrators.
Thank you. Just a couple brief updates regarding some of our open searches. Next week, we have scheduled interviews for the new Director of Workforce Development. As well, next week, we'll begin the process of reviewing applications for Chief Equity Diversity Officer. So those two processes are moving ahead. Other than that, in county administration, both consultants for strategic planning as well as the grant consultant, we've been continuing our work with them. Stakeholder engagement will start in earnest for strategic planning throughout the summer and then into the fall. And the grant consultant has completed their brief survey of departments to understand where they're at, what their capacity is for applying for and managing grants, and we expect to receive that report in administration in order to move forward, implementing some helpful tools and resources and to actually begin applying for some grant funding. And then just in the realm of policy updates, I know at the last GEO meeting we had discussed adding language to the procurement policy regarding some of the donated goods and services or free goods and services. After further discussion with finance, we're actually going to create a new policy for that specific topic. It doesn't really fit within the procurement policy, so stay tuned. That will be coming. Sure. Norma, did you have anything else to add?
Budget's moving. The new budget software is moving along pretty well, and yes, we've had our bumps in the road, but it should look very different this year when you get your.
Cool. Looking forward to it. Mike?
New state law about, I think, are we going to have a new policy for it, for the protection of employees who want to do breastfeeding and having a space available for them to do that?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That has been discussed with Ruby and HR, and that's currently being worked on as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Other questions? All right, County Attorney Holly Mosher is here.
So I don't have any specific updates. It's pretty much business as usual. You're going to see. But I think if you have any specific questions about anything that we're doing in the office, I can answer more specifically.
Questions for Holly? Well, thank you for being here and listening to all this riveting discussion. Director of Finance, Lori.
I don't have any updates today, but I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has one, or any.
Questions?
Staying employed with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to ask Dominic to come down from above and talk to us a little bit about monitors and
Amanda.
That's
Amanda,
Yeah.
can I just make one?
Oh.
I just wanted
Oh,
to
yeah,
let
yeah,
the
yeah.
committee know that I emailed legislators yesterday and informed them that the vacant deputy clerk position has been offered and accepted to an individual, and I will move forward at the July 18th meeting asking for the legislature to confirm her appointment. As for office space, I also addressed that in my email, and we're going to be creative, and we will work with facilities to find the best solution. So thank you, everybody, for your support in that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for saying all that.
I'd mention in the spirit of there's always I learn something new every day here. Katrina informed me that deputy legislator clerks, go ahead, you want to say it?
Deputy clerk of the legislature, they are required to be confirmed by the legislature.
Via the charter.
Yes, that's a spelled out, everything's spelled out in the charter. That's what Kathy told me.
They're confidential, right?
Great, thank you. All right, Dominic.
Thanks. Yeah, I know we're close to time, so I'll spare you other updates from my office for now, but here specifically to discuss the future of the monitors in this room and how legislators and the public view the meetings while we're in this space. As you all know, this building requires us to be creative with how we lay things out. The screens and projectors that we've used over time are around 10 years old, and the projectors are nearing the end of their useful life. Some malfunctions, some other issues I can go into in more depth later if need be. And this screen that we've been using at the end of the table, which has many benefits, including if we turned off the stream for the rest of the room, you can still use this for executive session or other things as well, belongs to the Department of Emergency Response. We've been loaning it from them for several years. During COVID, there were a lot of technical changes we made during COVID. I'll spare some of those details as well. But part of the issue is adding 2 legislators with the redistricting will take up more space at the table. So we need more real estate here as well. And then the screen also blocks the doors, so that's sort of a security concern that several of us have had as we've gone along. And so we've looked at creative solutions that could be done, and I essentially have 3 options to initially present and continue discussing. One would be purchasing new projectors and moving forward with projectors, though our vendors who have worked with us on this do not recommend projectors. Their lifespan is not as long as other technology, and their serviceability is very limited. We have serviced these. There are plastic parts in some of them that are actually breaking because of the heat in the projectors as well, so that's a concern regardless. And there may be a point where we are unable to install new bulbs. We've bought some. You can see that they've gotten a little bit better. We've put new, brighter bulbs in them. So option 1 would be continuing with a projector-based solution. That would be north of $30,000. I think a little bit closer to $60,000. It just depends on the types of models we went with. You've probably experienced some color issues on these projectors where it's hard to delineate some colors. Part of that's the lighting in this room. Part of it's just projector technology. It's come a long way. They have 4K projectors, but those are very expensive and hard to upkeep tools. So that's option 1. Quite expensive. That would be have to be a long process to sort of identify the best projectors, et cetera. Option 2 is we've temporarily, and installed is not the right word, we've temporarily placed a 55-inch monitor inside the oval. I've set the camera so viewers online can sort of see where it is, so that legislators could view it from across the oval. And if folks want to move around to observe it,
I need a
feel
little more
free.
explanation. What are we talking about?
This right here.
There is
Inside the oval. There's a temporary monitor. Sorry, yeah. There's a temporary monitor inside the oval that we've just set up for this week. It's on loan from one of our vendors who procures screens. And it's essentially for this meeting showing a mirror version of what's up on the large projectors. So this is a temporary solution with the loaner screen size. If we were to go with the solution, we would not alter the actual oval itself, but we'd create a stand for 2, 1 on each side, so that legislators all the way around the oval could see across. These are called, in the industry, confidence mounts. They're typically someone who's giving a presentation on a stage would be able to look down and see. You may have seen them on TED Talks. They have them at the front of the stage. So those 2 would be the primary areas where most legislators could see a high-resolution version of the meeting, similar to what you see here at a marginal cost in comparison. The current thought is that we'd also install 2 additional screens for a mix of legislators being able to view and for the public who come to the space, because these ones in the oval wouldn't be something the public would be able to see. So tentatively, what we've been discussing with ITS, the clerks, and with vendors is a large screen on that back wall above where the public signs the blue papers. Right where the respect poster is. And that would be quite large. That would be maybe a third larger than this screen. The cost on those has really decreased over the past 10 years, so it allows us to be more creative. It would be mounted on the wall. It would essentially project the same things that are on the screens inside. Some legislators may choose to look at that instead of what's inside the oval, but it would be great for the public on that side to be able to see. And then a fourth, smaller screen, and this is sort of something we're still working on, that would be above the cabinets, sort of out of the way, but something that majority people in the public and people entering the doors facing that direction so that the public could see. This room does make it quite difficult of where to place things, and we don't want too many. 4 feels like an appropriate number, with 2 that are sort of visible to anyone in the room and 2 that are focused specifically for legislators. There's some other technical details I could go into if need be, but that's option 2. That would cost south of $15,000, depending on what mounts we had or what things we had to do. So, and that's something that we have some flexibility in our media production budget to be able to work on if that's how we wanted to move forward. We could do that with relative ease based on the cost. And then the third option would be maintaining what we have with the projectors, though I will advise that they are very difficult to service over time, and they are at risk of failing. So if one failed more permanently, we'd have to resort back to one of these other options at some point. On option 3, if that was the stated direction to go, we would, I think, still want to remove this at the end of the oval and have a different solution there. So we would lose functionality with option 3, because this is still a loaned item, and for things like executive session or other uses of screens in the room, backup options, et cetera. You know, I'm backing up for Rob today, but if both of us were out or in a situation where I had something else and was unable to do that, this still allows us to run a meeting from it, whereas if we got rid of this, we'd lose some capacity there. So those are the 3 options. There's a lot of different checklist of what would need to be done under each, but I wanted to start the conversation presenting here as we discussed this in our last meeting, and we have this sample sort of loaner device that you can see as a sample for this week. So I can answer questions and talk about what you all envision as next steps.
Great. I see you, Mike. So if this goes away and there's a screen there and these 2, how will you get the view of the whole oval?
So we have the cameras that you can see in the room. Okay. There are 5 cameras in the room right now. We're replacing them with higher quality cameras. That's already a part of the capital plan this year. That work will happen in August. So you will be able to have the view of the whole room. Okay. And with the upgrades that we're doing in the media production suite, we'll be able to interface that across different systems as well. So, you know, it's nice for the clerks to be able to run a closed meeting on this with the room. We would work to retain that ability. There may have to be a separate webcam that's propped up under some of these circumstances.
Thanks. Mike?
What about that screen?
That screen does belong to legislature chambers. It is it's a great screen. It's used for the timer right now, though, and it could be used for some of what we're talking about, but it's on a different sort of interface. When it was installed, like if we were to try to connect it so it showed you what you see on these projectors, we'd have to run some new wiring because of the screen that was purchased. It's not that it couldn't be used, but it is often used for some other purposes as well, and it is.
But if you
out of the
put
way.
a screen over there, you'll have to run new wiring, right?
We would have to run some new wiring.
You're going to have a new acoustics engineer report because all of that soft application on the back walls were all at the acoustic engineer's recommendation. Fact is, they wanted us to have even more of it when we were redoing the chambers here because of echoes and other things here. So you got to be careful what you're going to do there. I think you'd probably have to have that reviewed. I mean, the one thing nice about the big screens is when we get things that are put up in front of us that are with tables and figures, we can usually read them off the big screen. I don't know if that's going to happen with the smaller ones or if they're further away, especially when we've seen them there. Yes, the colors are brighter, no question about that on the electronics, but these screens are visible by not only the legislators, but by the people in the galleries. So I just think that they are a good, they are still a good thing to have. I'm not surprised we might have to replace the projectors. They were expensive when they were first put in with the capital project. But I would certainly think that we don't want to do away with those without a lot of serious thought.
Thanks, Mike. Rich?
Yeah, just to be clear, your option 2, you would get rid of the projector, the screens, so it would open it up.
Tentatively, yes.
Yeah. Mike, it might be worth it to go sit in Deborah's seat, because you can see, I think if we went with this solution, you'd want them, you'd bring them up a little bit, maybe even creep up over the edge of this, but I think that's maybe a reasonable solution. To Mike's point about acoustics, I used to try cases here in the ancient history, but it was really interesting. You'd stand right about here, and the jury was here, and they couldn't necessarily hear you. It was, the acoustics in here were very, very strange. They've gotten dramatically better. So we don't want to discount what those panels have accomplished and maybe some other changes, and we might need to do some further work to make sure that all continues to function. But I think this might be the right direction. It would certainly, I think these hanging screens are kind of ugly. This is a beautiful space. You know, those screens may have some impact on acoustics too, though. They might be helping us keep the voices inside the oval. But yeah, I like it. And I like spending less than 15 rather than more than 30.
So with the screen, the setup, and so there would be 2 here, 2 there, how long would you expect those screens to last if you bought new ones?
At least the same 10 years as the projectors. We could get the vendor to give us another quote, but the servicing and the cost to replace is far less. One of these might go, and that would cost, a few $1,000s at the most. For, maybe the one in the back is, 6 of that $15,000, and, that's a much easier cost to manage. So they've suggested at least the 10 years that those have lasted, but we all have TVs that have lasted longer than that with similar technology as well.
Right, so we could be getting more for less in that way.
Potentially. You will lose on the size. I mean, the size of these projectors
right.
is big, but this is not showing in high enough resolution to, I think, justify its size at today's where today's technology is.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Dan?
I don't have real strong opinions about any of this. This seems okay to me. The only observation I'm going to make is that I've been using, I'm sorry, I thought you guys had one too to test out. So I've been, keeping my eye on this during this meeting. The only thing is forward, it's a little uncomfortable in the long run.
Right.
But so is looking up for some people. I know that I see people doing this sometimes. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the right height is, but that's a little low.
Yeah, I think this is a 55-inch. After looking at it in the space, I think we'd measure it out for a 65-inch, which is 10 inches on the diameter, which increases the font sizes by 2 or 3 with the human eye, and mount it up a little bit higher, as Rich was suggesting, maybe flush with this, and perhaps even tilted on an angle a little bit so it makes it a little bit more natural for the eye and ergonomic as well.
And down there at your end, can you see it? Okay?
I can see that, but if we did do something in the back of the room, we would be able to see that too.
Yeah, and the chair has been using a laptop for.
We've hooked Shauna up with a laptop up here the last couple meetings, and she really liked that.
You could see presentations.
It just mirrors that.
Yeah. So then what would the chair be? They would be looking at this one?
Or the laptop, depending. They're joining Zoom on the laptop. So that's the other benefit of all the things that we've done is I have 4 different Zoom accounts running just this meeting. So anyone can hop on the Zoom, manage the participants, see the presentation, et cetera. And having that capability up at the dais there is a very beneficial improvement that we've had.
Rich?
Just not to make it more complicated, but option 4, could you do individual screens? Just wrap them around?
We could look into individual screens. We've discussed that a little bit here and there. I think it's another question of legislator preference and what folks are used to or comfortable with. The size of the screen relative to the nice desk, relative to the wiring might be a slightly more complex. That's part of why we've not decided to move thoroughly on that direction. But we could certainly look into something like that. I think it would likely be the wiring into the desk that would cause us some more logistics.
Well, we've got old cabling here that nobody uses anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that there probably are channels to run wiring. But I don't know if I'd like that better or not. I guess.
Yeah, I guess, I'm not sure either. I think having big screens for everyone to see probably makes more sense. And then if you're just replacing one versus if several go out or, whatever. What are you looking for from us today?
Some thoughts and direction on next step would be helpful. If there's a preferred option or another sort of presentation or discussion that needs to occur, I'd be happy to help prepare for those different things. I'd be happy to get the quote for any of the individual options pulled together. We have a recent one for the option 2, which is the new screens that's been recently prepared by the vendor who's letting us use this loaner screen. And then, knowing what approvals need to happen that you see on the legislature level and give that direction, then we'll move forward with the direction of the legislature.
Okay. My thought would be having, sort of a budget for each option would be helpful. So we have some numbers to look at. And then just sort of clearly stating what we're getting for, or the different options, what we'd be getting, pros and cons maybe. And then I think, this committee would want to approve it. I guess I feel like everyone should have a chance to, weigh in, and also the clerks too. I mean, this is stuff that you'll have to be monitoring and dealing with. So my personal inclination is option 2, is to, go with the screens, less expensive, I think maybe more able to be dealt with if issues come up. But I don't know, other thoughts about process, Dan?
Yes, I think an email to all legislators, putting them into what's going on, and suggesting that at a committee meeting over the next month, that they try sitting on this side to get the experience. I think that'll speak much more than words.
Yeah. Are we going to have this for future committee meetings this month, or?
We can. I don't know how long the loaner is available for. I'll have to ask Lauren in ITS because he's working with the vendor, but we can ask for that. They're more than willing to be supportive of us trying it out, and we could figure out a backup option if need be. Coming down and connecting another computer to it as the test is the sort of labor-intensive part. So I'm filling in for Rob for the next 3 or 4 legislature or committee meetings. So for those next several, it's entirely possible. And then we can go from there. So maybe at least through the end of next week is a definite possibility.
Okay. Do you want to send that email? I can send the email to legislators, or?
I can at least share with you the table with those costs and pros and cons, and then see how you'd like to move forward with that.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Mike?
What are you going to show us about where those costs came from in comparison? We've heard a lot of figures about these projectors, and now you're saying 60,000. Last time I heard it was 30,000, so.
It's variable depending on the type of projector that we went with. We had the projector quote prepared for us as a part of the overall capital project of $150,000 worth of upgrades to the entire system. Those upgrades are managing the cameras and a lot of outdated technology and the systems that are connected together in very creative ways, but not super sustainable ways. So this capital project, when we did the budget for it, the initial response was somewhere in the $400,000 range. It was a very significant upgrade plan. It included the projectors. We had a budget of $150,000, so we scaled it down appropriately as to what was needed there. So the numbers for the projectors came from there, and they've come from conversations with both of two consultants who work with us on different technology. So we can get you, I think the easiest one to get you is the one from Diversified, which is the contractor who's managing the capital program, who've already looked at, know the space, understand the connections, and understand the screens needed for the space, because they're the ones who installed it originally. So I think that's a good place to start, and then we could ask them for other quotes around it if need be, but these are pretty significant projectors, so I think the floor of the 30 is an appropriate floor of that cost from our conversations.
Yeah, that's great. If you can get us that sort of estimate and those numbers, that would be helpful. Dan?
Is there an audio component to the project, part of this project?
Currently, no audio enhancements planned for it, but there's some rewiring and adjustments with how it connects to the system. So, for example, the system that runs the projectors has to be on for the audio to work, et cetera, which is a little bit beyond my total understanding. Rob can speak to it much better, but adjusting that so that we can run the system without the projectors needing to be engaged either way would be important.
I just brought it up because, and Mike, I know there was a lot of discussion about this back when you're sitting out there, it's hard to hear, So I just, in the future, that would be a great problem to try to solve.
Certainly, yeah. There are definite uses of the two speakers that are on the walls there that could be improved regardless.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This is lots of good information. You'll send me some info. I'll send the legislature some thoughts, and we will go from there. Any committee members have any updates or reports you want to bring forward?
Just a half an hour of random.
You got something important to talk about, Rich?
I do
well,
not.
We have had a couple of short meetings in the past couple months, so one going over is.
What have you done for us lately?
Like a rollover?
This is like the rollover policy. What I've done for you lately is you didn't have to talk about the rules today. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Lots of good stuff.
Good meeting.
Recording